Let's talk about Socrates. You've definitely heard the name. He's one of the founding fathers of Western philosophy. But here's the thing. Socrates, this son of a stonemason who just wandered around ancient Athens questioning everybody, he's a total enigma. This is the man who completely reshaped how we think, but he left behind a mystery that we're still trying to solve today.
And that's the big puzzle, isn't it? I mean, how can a guy who literally taught the world to think never write down a single word of his own philosophy? How do we even begin to get inside the mind of a man who left behind no records of his own? Well, this mystery is so famous that it actually has a name, the Socratic Problem. It's the challenge for historians and philosophers of trying to piece together the real Socrates from basically a patchwork of conflicting secondhand stories. You see, everything we think we know about him comes from other people, mostly his students, like the philosopher Plato and the historian Xenophon. But here's the kicker. Their accounts just don't always line up. And I mean they really don't line up. Plato gives us this brilliant, ironic, deeply philosophical Socrates. Xenophon's version, though, he's kind of duller, more of a practical, moralistic teacher. So which one is the real deal? The honest answer is, we'll probably never know for sure. And it wasn't just his students who were talking about him. Oh no, long before his trial, Socrates was a full-blown public figure in Athens, and a pretty polarizing one at that. He was even roasted on stage in a popular comedy as this goofy philosopher. That just goes to show you he had definitely made a name for himself.
Okay, so if the written accounts are all over the place, where do we even begin to look for clues? Well, we can start with his public persona and his totally revolutionary way of thinking.
Socrates had this amazing way of describing himself. He called himself a gadfly. You know, like a horsefly sent by the gods to sting the lazy horse of Athens to get it moving. His goal wasn't to give people answers. It was to jolt them into questioning everything they thought they knew. And he did this with his legendary technique, the elenchus, which we now call the Socratic Method. It's this incredibly powerful way of examining beliefs not by a lecturing, but through a relentless back-and-forth series of questions.
So here's how it worked. Socrates would go up to some supposedly wise person and ask a simple-sounding question like, "Hey, what is justice?" And then, as they tried to answer, he would just keep asking more and more questions until their entire argument completely unraveled. And the wild part is, the point wasn't to arrive at a perfect answer. The point was for both of them to get to a place where they admitted they didn't really know what they were talking about. And out of all this constant questioning, this truly groundbreaking philosophy started to emerge. It wasn't really a set of rules to follow, it was a completely new way to live.
At the absolute heart of his philosophy is this idea of Socratic ignorance. See, the whole point of his method wasn't to prove how smart he was. It was to show that real wisdom begins when you can humbly admit what you don't know. Which of course brings us to his most famous line. Now this isn't him saying he's dumb, not at all. It's a statement of profound intellectual humility. Think about it. In a city full of experts who claimed to have all the answers, he was the one person brave enough to say, "I don't."
And starting from that humble place led to some really radical ethical ideas. For Socrates, being a good person, or virtue, was a kind of knowledge. He believed that no one does bad things on purpose. They just do them out of ignorance about what's truly good. Everyone is just trying to achieve a good life, or eudaimonia, as the Greeks called it. And since harming others ultimately harms your own soul, he concluded that you should never ever act unjustly, not even to get revenge.
And all this builds up to his most powerful, most enduring conclusion. For Socrates, self-reflection wasn't just some hobby. It was the entire point of being human. A life without that kind of deep, critical self-examination, he said, is simply not worth living.
But as you can imagine, walking around telling all the most powerful people in the city that they don't know anything, well, it doesn't make you very popular. Being a gadfly in a politically charged city is a dangerous game, and Socrates' story was heading for a tragic climax. To really get what happened, you have to understand the mood in Athens at the time. And honestly, it was a mess. They had just lost a devastating war to Sparta. Their democracy had been torn down and replaced by a group of brutal dictators. And even though democracy had been restored, the city was paranoid, unstable, and on edge. And it was in this super tense environment that Socrates was dragged into court. The official charges were impiety, not respecting the gods, and corrupting the youth. But let's be real, most historians agree the true reasons were political. He was seen as a threat to a very fragile system.
So he's found guilty, and then the jury asks him to propose his own punishment. In a final, amazing act of Socratic irony, he basically says that for his service to the city, his penalty should be a reward. Free food and housing from the state for the rest of his life. Yeah, the jury wasn't amused. They sentenced him to death.
But even then, he had a way out. His friends bribed the guards and set up an escape, but he refused to go. He argued that he had lived his entire life under the laws of Athens, and he wouldn't betray them now, even when they were being used unjustly against him. So he stayed, and he drank the poisoned hemlock. So why, more than 2,000 years later, are we still so fascinated by a man who wrote nothing and was executed by his own people? Well, the answer is in the legacy he left behind. His death became his final, most powerful philosophical argument. By choosing to die rather than abandon his principles, Socrates went from being a controversial local figure to a martyr for free thought and intellectual integrity. And his influence after that was just immense. Pretty much every major school of Western thought that followed, from Plato and Aristotle to the Stoics and the Skeptics, traced their roots right back to Socrates and his method of questioning everything.
This analogy really gets to the heart of his message. For Socrates, critical thinking wasn't destructive. It was necessary medicine for a healthy society, even if it tasted bitter.
And that leaves us with one final Socratic challenge. His method of questioning our own most deeply held beliefs is just as relevant now as it was in ancient Athens. So the question he really leaves for all of us is this: what do you refuse to examine?